This video right here is about how, when and why you might want to pit your players against one another with some PvP action. Stick around to the end because this is a pretty complex subject worth some serious consideration. And I think you and I, we're gonna have to work through this one together. If at any point in this video you find yourself thinking, oh man, I like this one, this is a good video, then I'd like you to consider please subscribing, liking the video, maybe emailing it to your dad, all the usual stuff. You see, I'm trying to hit 5,000 subscribers this year for tax reasons, and I am failing miserably, so I really need your help to get there. In video game terms, titles tend to break down into either player versus player or player versus environment. That's PvP and PvE. Player versus player games are by definition multiplayer. There's got to be a player there to lose. So they're games like Overwatch or League of Legends, where you're winning, your win condition entirely depends on another player losing. And it's also in board games like Monopoly, where you're trying to crush your sister with crippling debt. Or, well, in real life, how capitalism is trying to crush all of us with crippling debt. That got sad. Oh, sorry, one sec. Ranger, if you're going to be in here, at least get on camera so people like the video, okay? Dungeons and Dragons, though, is usually PvE, player versus environment, where the Dungeon Master takes the role of the environment and they set up obstacles for the players to overcome through jolly cooperation. So most single player video games are going to be players versus environment, right? So Pokemon, PvE, Final Fantasy, PvE, God of War, PvE, you name it. But the point of this video is that if you turn the dial a little bit, that PvE dial, you can get Dungeons and Dragons to take on the shape of a player versus player experience. I reckon there are two ways that the term PvP can fit into Dungeons and Dragons, and that's through either mechanical PvP or narrative PvP. So mechanical PvP is where my rogue backstabs your paladin. And narrative PvP would be something like where my rogue is keeping a secret from your paladin. Maybe my rogue is actually working for the big bad guy. Maybe my rogue is the big bad guy. Whew, whew, what a twist. As far as mechanical PvP goes, I think that Critical Role has a good example of both healthy mechanical PvP and also unhealthy mechanical PvP, which you'd either want to emulate or, not engage with. Not 3, but 4 times Matt Mercer has thrown the party into some kind of mystical arena where they've had to fight to the death in a battle royale. Oh, but Perkins, I can hear someone yelling. Oh, they're slamming their fists on the table like a cosmic gavel. Oh, but that never happened. How could the campaign continue if they all killed each other? Well, my friend, here's the thing. A battle royale is non-canon. All the feelings hurt, players killed, damage sustained, none of that carries over into the actual campaign. It's just a way to blow off steam and test your abilities by slapping your mates. So that's right, after a non-canon battle royale, the chronology of the campaign isn't affected at all. Sometimes Matt Mercer has given a point of inspiration to be used later in the actual campaign to the winner of the battle royale, but that's a pretty small meta boon. If a battle royale sounds like your kind of jam, then what you can do is take a little bit of inspiration from battle royale style video games like Fortnite or Apex Legends, where they have this encroaching barrier, this deadly mist on the outside of the battle map, and it encroaches and gets closer and closer round by round. So as the fight continues, the players have to get closer together. There's this hazard forcing more and more drama, more and more conflict. For example, if this battle map from 2 Minute Tabletop is your arena for your battle royale, on round 1 it might be the whole thing, but by round 10 the area's gotten smaller and smaller, forcing more conflict, more drama, more violence. But mechanical PvP isn't limited to just attacks against other players. It can also be when players use their skills on one another, use their abilities on one another. It kind of takes away from a player's autonomy when one player goes, no, this is happening to you now and you have to roll to defend against it. I'd consider that mechanical PvP even without full-blown combat. So check out this clip from Critical Role Season 1, because I think this is a great example of what not to do. I think this is an example of unhealthy PvP.
To be fair, Scanlan, I never disappeared to begin with.
Well, you weren't there when we needed you the most. You were out doing God knows what.
Quite the contrary. If it wasn't for me, you'd still be fighting that damn thing.
What on earth are you talking
Silence.
about? Dispel magic.
Yes, I do. Counterspell.
Do I have a will save?
No, you're done.
That low enough level?
Is that kind of aggression fun, Tiberius? I don't think it is. Is that kind of aggression worthwhile? I don't know. See, I reckon if your sorcerer is using silence on the bard to win an argument, that's PvP. If your rogue is using sleight of hand to steal from another player, that's PvP. If your wizard is using prestidigitation to make your barbarian smell, that's PvP. So how are you meant to work out which actions are acceptable for PvP at the table and which ones aren't? Well, we'll get into that in a bit. But first, let's talk about narrative PvP, right? Which is when my players might have different goals, opposing goals that are mutually exclusive. And this can be kind of interesting, sometimes fun if done with the right group. Like I said before, it's kind of a sliding scale, where it might be as simple as one player having a secret that the other players don't know, or it could be as major as one player actually working for the big bad guy, which, that might be fun. Remember, if you see him, you have to subscribe. That's the deal. Early 5th edition adventures actually had that kind of narrative PvP hard-boiled into the adventures themselves. Through the faction system, there were 5 factions that players could join. There was the Gauntlet, the Lord's Alliance, the Harpers, the Zentarum, and another one, there's definitely a 5th, the Green Boys. Green Boys? That's alright. Beautiful singing, buddy. Thanks for being in the video. Each of these 5 player factions, they're all heroic in their own kind of way, but they've got different goals, they've got different ethics, they've got different methods, and they're all kind of pulling players in different directions, narratively. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of what each faction does or is, because I don't care. What I do care about is the drama and conflict that comes from those opposing allegiances. When we played Princes of the Apocalypse, half the party was part of the Harpers, half the party was part of the Zentarum. And when we found a destruction orb, which in this campaign was like a fantasy WMD, the Zentarum, they wanted to keep the orb to themselves for later use, and the Harpers wanted to destroy it to, demilitarize Red Larch or whatever. Now, that's an interesting kind of problem to have and can go a few different ways. In the worst case scenario, and for those playing at home, that's bad. In the worst case scenario, that kind of inter-party conflict could trigger some kind of argument or even analysis paralysis as the party can't decide which side to go with. Or it could leave some players, not the characters, some players feeling dissatisfied as their character doesn't get their way and they don't get to tell the story as a group. Some people don't enjoy that, and that's okay. But in the best case scenario, the result is going to be drama. If you read the room and you know your group, some groups thrive on that conflict, on that drama, on that narrative PvP, because they use that conflict to drive drama to some kind of satisfying end, to flip the game into a different kind of energy and really propel the story forward. Hey my dude, here's a quick shout out because Luke from the DM's Lair had a really good video last week about factions in D&D, and you can find it either up here or up here. I don't know which corner the card appears. But in my opinion, there are 4 crucial questions that you need to ask yourself before dishing up a warm plate of PvP at your table. Is your character doing PvP, or are you as a player doing PvP? Because if you're acting out real life frustrations in the game using Dungeons & Dragons as a proxy to air out real life grievances and frustrations, that's not okay. Step outside the game and look for an out-of-game solution to an out-of-game problem, instead of just having a Monopoly money fight, which doesn't work. Is this PvP gonna be fun for every player? And if the answer is no, if a single player is not down to clown with PvP action, then you're not allowed to just do it. It's not okay. No player has the right to knowingly let their in-game decisions negatively affect the fun of any other player. Like your mates, just be kind, have fun. If you're about to mash one of your mates, do you have their consent to do so? So I saw Matt Colville have a kind of good take on this, where he doesn't allow players to use their abilities on each other at all. So no, you can't roll to deceive Anna's character. No, you cannot roll to pickpocket Tom's character. You can't use abilities on each other. But I have a slightly different approach. I say, okay, Barbarian, if you want to try and grapple the Druid, you can attempt to do that, but then I turn to the Druid and I say, the Barbarian's trying to grapple you. You don't even have to roll if you don't want to. This isn't a contest. You get to decide whether this succeeds or not. If it's more interesting to you, yeah, you can roll. But if you don't want to be grappled by that character, it doesn't succeed. If you think it's going to be more interesting to be grappled, then it succeeds. That's entirely up to you. Because if another player is aiming their character at you and you don't think that's going to be fun for your character, if you don't like your autonomy being stepped on that way, then you should have the ability just to say outright, no, without disrupting the game. is this PvP even worthwhile? So if the answer is no, if you're not going to enhance the game or drive the story or make the game more interesting, then why are you bothering to do it at all? Instead, just do a non-canon battle royale. That's why it's my preference to do that. Sometimes narrative PvP can be interesting, but you've really got to ask yourself, is it worthwhile? But in general, my advice is don't slap your mates. Instead, slap like.